Spiritual Bullshit with Tigmonk and Maya Lila. Enjoy!
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. This is Tiger Singleton, aka Tigmonk. It is time for Spiritual Bullshit. Maya, how are you?
I'm great.
Are you?
Yeah.
You have that kind of tone to your voice, so I really believe you.
I'm convincing.
You convinced me that everything's fine. That's great. Did you ever notice that it's like if you say something with enough confidence,
Yeah.
it just like dispels any doubt?
Oh, yeah.
Even if it's bullshit.
Yeah.
It's like, because, what's perfect example of that is when someone's telling you they're bullshit.
Yeah.
And it makes you question your own truth,
Yeah.
or your own understanding that all is well.
Because they're so assured.
Yeah, they're so assured that life's shitty, where that they almost convince you that life is shitty. I think we all have those friends, and maybe we are that person at times ourselves.
Yeah.
But we do that. We convince ourselves.
Oh, yeah. We're the only ones who convince ourselves.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
We say, God damn it, life is bullshit.
Yeah.
And we, totally psych ourselves out about that. But today's topic, we're going to talk about arguments and ideals. And the ideals is something we wanted to talk about last week.
Yeah.
Never got to it, though.
Yeah. Ideals. I'm a very idealistic person, I guess I would say. I've always had very high ideals. And I wonder, I would guess most people that think of themselves as spiritual or are on some kind of spiritual path probably have high ideals because they're trying to connect with something higher.
Yeah. Well, how would you define an ideal?
An ideal, I guess it's like a very high standard. And I kind of feel like it relates to truth somehow. Like, yeah, a high standard or a high standard of truth.
Well, because when I hear the word ideal, I think of somebody going over to another country and bombing them in support of their ideal.
Really? I don't think of that.
I know.
I think of that as like maybe dogma or principles or something.
Yeah.
Because for ideals, I feel like it's more of your perfect conception of something. Like the ideal person would be someone who is like honest and, whatever, all these words of like the ideal person or the ideal living situation.
Does that concept work well for you as far as incorporating that into your experience?
I guess yes and no. Like I feel like idealism, if you're too rigid about it, then it turns into judgment, and then it turns into the kind of the argument and the fighting. And so ideals can be maybe destructive, but they can also be constructive if you have an intention of, living up to a high standard for yourself or an ideal. But it depends whether there's a judgment there, I guess.
And it seems like the only real ideal, if there was one that pertained to yourself.
Yeah.
Rather than other people. Yeah,
which is tricky because the same thing with ethics. Like ethics, for me, depend on your own values of it depends on what your value is. And so you're ethical according to your values. But once you externalize ethics, they're no longer ethics because it would have to be each person adhering to their own values, and everybody values different things.
Yeah.
So with ideals, there's like I have my ideals of perfection or of the highest representation of something, but I think everybody's going to have their own ideal of what is the perfect thing or what is the perfect person or their highest self.
Yeah, and I see that as just like a natural function of the mind.
Yeah.
Where it creates that image.
Yeah.
Of true. This is more supportive or whatever. But it also gets into such a tricky area where the egoic mind wants to use the ideal for a sense of security. Saying that, okay, well, if it was this way, then I would be more happy or I'd be more peaceful.
I'd be whole.
Yeah, I'd be whole. And so the ideal works in conjunction with an idea of wholeness, meaning that once it becomes my ideal, then everything will be okay. Yeah. Then everything will be fine. And so in that sense, I find it disastrous for my experience.
Yeah.
Every time I fall into some space of having an ideal of, man, life would be awesome if it was like this, then it prepares me for this huge letdown every time in the way of, no, It's not like that.
I feel like it goes back to that. It's never just light. It's always light and dark.
Right.
Because there's two sides to the coin and the balance and, the cycles of everything and the duality. And so the ideal really doesn't leave any room for shadow.
Oh, true story. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is part of the whole.
Right.
So if you're just going for the ideal, then you're kind of cutting out all of the shadow or all of the bad stuff or any sadness.
Yeah.
You're like, well, sadness isn't part of an ideal.
True.
Yeah.
And when I hear you say that, for me, I can't find any use for an ideal that doesn't include its opposite of the ideal. Meaning that, yes, it would be nice if it's like this, but this is also allowed.
Yeah.
And so you have to find a way of including all of that.
Yeah. And I guess that's
You know what? In that, and I totally cut you off because I was really excited about what I'm going to say. And it seems like what it comes back to is the ultimate ideal is your life right now. It's like no matter how life is showing up, this is the ultimate ideal because this is the way it is.
That's an interesting point because usually ideals are in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. It's something to creep towards.
Yeah.
Or, to become, not realizing that
or to measure yourself against.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in my journey, all of the profound insight always just comes back to the realization that, oh my God, this moment is exactly how it's supposed to be. And it can't get any better than the fullness that is already here.
So what if this was the ideal?
And it kind of is, though.
Yeah, but it's an interesting game to put in your mind because, of course, in our minds, the ideal would be I have $1 million and I have the perfect boyfriend and I have blah, blah, blah. But or I'm my ideal weight or whatever. Right. But what if now is the ideal, is your ideal?
Oh, God, I can see that being so terrifying to someone really holding on to the ideal because it's like, no.
Because then I might never get that if I let go of it.
God, and that's so funny because it's like, it's taking, again, the idea of wholeness or perfection and putting it in the future. And if you negate that and say, no, this is the perfection. Yeah. What you're experiencing right now.
Right now.
But the mind, the mentally created self just argues with that. Yeah. Constantly. And I find in my own experience, I might have, 5 different ideals across 5 different categories of my life. But yet my experience has never been a reflection of that. It might have seemed like it got close, but because it's always changing too, it never becomes the concrete ideal. Yeah. It never can and it never will be. And so maybe an ideal is a point of direction that one wants to see themselves moving into. But any sense of believing that it's going to end up that way, and then that's where the peace is, I think is a disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. And then if we have all these ideals, we're constantly judging life against the ideal, which is judging life against a fabricated concept in the mind and not judging life according to life.
Yeah. A 2-dimensional concept.
Yeah.
That doesn't take into account the shadow and the light.
Yeah.
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 And then, but it's interesting how the wholeness is what makes it beautiful, like the shadow and the light and the two sides and the sadness and the joy. But we look at the ideal as being beautiful. Yeah. Even though it's not because it's 2-dimensional.
Well, yeah.
And it's not whole.
And that beauty, from that perspective, I see it as like a conditioned idea of what beauty is. Yeah. Because, the perfect example of that is wanting to reshape our body to match the image that society tells us is acceptable. Yeah. And if you're not that, then you're not acceptable. Yeah. And so our ideal then becomes, the perfect body, which I've played that game my whole freaking life. Yeah. I'm so sick of it.
Oh, yeah. No, me too.
And it seems like the more I am sick of it, then the more I just gain weight.
Really? Is that true?
Well, yeah, the more I argue. Okay. And the more I try and manipulate and control and psych myself up and all of that, it just seems like it's always ends up in a disaster.
So there's like a backlash. Yeah. Like you try to make yourself, do that one, and then it's like, fuck you, and you kind of the sabotage cycle or something. Yeah, yeah. It's like, I'm not going to conform to your ideals.
Oh my God, that's great.
It's like you're a rebel.
Yeah. Inside, I'm rebelling against my ideal.
The internal fight.
Yeah. Well, then our arguments against reality can almost say that it's pointing to the ideals that we're holding, except the argument isn't with the ideal. The argument's with what is, with reality. And that seems like it just never works.
Yeah.
I mean, you can argue with an ideal, which is, remaining in the mental space, but you can't really argue with reality and have it be real.
Well, you can, but then you're fighting all the time.
Yeah, and you never win.
Yeah.
It's like you just can't argue with reality and have, and win.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
And so then suffering.
Yep.
Yeah.
Enter suffering.
Yeah. So I guess then if you're not arguing anymore, then are you like letting go of your ideals? Is that what we're doing?
That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Because again, when you're in the space of total union with the present moment, there's nothing really to look towards.
Yeah.
Or to cling after or even want to change so much.
Because the ideal is now.
Exactly. It comes
that's
back.
Whatever is in the now.
Yeah. And I think ultimately that's what all of our ideals are pointing to, because the ideal says, I want such and such, which is really just saying I want to feel peaceful and I want to feel complete and whole. And so we say, okay, that's what I really want. Peace, wholeness, love. And then the mind creates an image of what it thinks will give it that.
Yeah.
That becomes the ideal, not realizing that all of those experiences of peace, love, and connection or whatever is already here.
Yeah. In the now.
Yeah. And then when you connect with that, then the ideal really doesn't matter. It becomes irrelevant. Because it's like when you trust in the present moment, you don't know what life needs.
Yeah.
As it relates to everyone else or the world. And I think.
Or even yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, God, that's such a big one, too. It always points back to the self.
Yeah.
But it's funny because it's like the concept of peace. We can say, okay, well, world peace looks like this, which is really just saying, I think everyone else should do what I think they should do.
Yeah.
And then I can be at peace.
Yeah.
And when you kind of rein that into
dictatorship.
Exactly.
Nobody wants that, except for the dictator.
Yeah, and I think we all have this little dictator inside that's trying to control everyone and everything so that it can be at peace.
Totally.
But so, yeah, world peace, I don't see as a real thing where everyone gets along.
Yeah.
And it now takes the form of, no war, no conflict, none of that.
Yeah.
I think the invitation is to recognize a peace that exists within all of that.
Yeah.
No matter what's going on.
Well, and also what if, this is just a hypothetical, but like what if everybody found internal peace? Then we would also have world peace. Not having the external, like all the governments get along or whatever. It's like if every person had the internal peace, then we would have world peace.
Yeah.
Because everybody would be at peace.
But don't you find for your own world that when you're in a crazy amount of peace, then it's like the whole world's at peace?
Yeah. Because you don't have any argument with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's like you see peace in everything.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, there's a war going on. Oh, that's the perfect lesson for them.
Yeah.
Whoever's playing that game.
Yeah.
And so
must be exciting.
Yeah. It's working out somehow. And because that's what I recognize about peace in my own experience is when it's really discovered within what you are, you see it everywhere. You see this perfection just over the entire earth.
Yeah.
That says this is the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And all of my arguments that say it should be this way or that way are just totally irrelevant. But it's so funny how sticky it is when it comes back to the self and the arguments we have towards our identity. Because it's one thing to have it for the world, which is really just an extension of the argument we have with ourselves.
Yeah.
Because once we're at total peace with ourselves, then we don't try and change anybody else or change life.
Accept it. Yeah.
Yeah, you just come to terms with it. Because it's like I can look, and that's so great because it's like I can look at my own body as the universe and have infinite amounts of arguments, or I could look at Earth as the universe and have infinite amount of arguments. And so, no matter where you go, there's always the potential to have argument, to find something that you think isn't supposed to be that way.
Yeah, isn't aligning with your ideals that you created.
Yeah.
And yeah, ideals are just ideas.
Just that.
Yeah.
Just ideas.
And everybody has different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I find that really fascinating, the relativism that everybody is experiencing reality through their own perception. So everybody's reality is subjective to their perception. Yeah. And so it's all relative.
All of it.
Like, all of it. And that freaks people out because they're like, oh, but killing is bad. And it's like, not always. You ate a hamburger, that was killing, and, whatever. But that Yeah.
Or we can also say, oh, I would never kill somebody. Mm-hmm. But it's like the universe can organize a scenario, where that makes sense, for you. And then everybody else could have their judgment about you killing someone.
Yeah.
But again, not to condone or
oh, yeah.
whatever. Oh, my goodness. So I was driving over here and somebody very lightly cut me off on the freeway and they didn't use their blinker.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because immediately there was this response that really wanted to get pissed off. Not so much for cutting me off, but not using their blinker. And it's like I felt this surge of adrenaline rush up. And then immediately I recognize it's not about this. The anger that I'm feeling right now has absolutely nothing to do with the car moving in front of me.
Yep.
And it's such a beautiful thing to recognize because I find that it almost neutralizes the anger or the projection of anger onto another person. It's like, no, this is about something else. This is about me being scared and like the bigger picture of life as it relates to me as a human being. And so as I'm going through my experience of living, these little things that are happening are exposing the conflict that I have with myself. And it's funny to watch it and track it back, all these little arguments or all these things that might piss me off. Because as I trace them back, they always come back to the conclusion that I'm not accepting what I am and that I am terribly afraid about my space in this life.
Yeah.
Just, it's some sort of doubt exposing itself.
Yeah.
And so we're never, ever angry at life. No matter what we see happening, it's always just an expression of the anger we have towards ourselves.
That's fascinating. I saw that very powerfully. An example of that with one of my best friends, and we were driving to go to his storage unit, and he all of a sudden was really angry about the traffic. And he's not an angry person usually. And I looked at him and I was like, what is this about? And he's like, oh, just this fucking traffic, da da da. And I was like, well, we're going to your storage unit to go through your dead father's belongings. Do you think maybe you're upset about that? And, he was like, oh, yeah. And then, it was just, it became so clear about how the anger wasn't about the traffic. It was about like all this emotion that was coming up for him with his father. And like he hadn't been to this place for a year. And, and he was just, that was underneath, but he was not wanting to look at it or deal with it or whatever. And so it projected into anger at the traffic.
Yeah.
And yeah, I try to remember that for myself of like, okay, so I am getting upset about something, it's like, well, what's really underneath that? Because there's something else that's deeper that might be another emotion, like sadness or fear. That's the anger is, covering up. And it's just totally not even about whatever it is that I think I'm angry about.
No, and it's funny too, because I don't even know what to do about it. It's like even recognizing it. And I think maybe that's the only thing I can really do is just recognize that it's not about this. Because as I recognized it in that moment, I completely let go of the other driver.
Yeah.
It's like that train of thought completely cut itself off the moment I realized that there was no blame necessary.
Yeah.
But I find that my mind, it recognizes that. And then it's like, okay, well, what do I do about it?
Yeah.
But really, I don't know that there is anything I can do other than just recognize that that's not what's really happening.
But I think, when you recognize it and then slowly it starts to, you realize the next time someone cuts you off, it's like, oh, like it's just somebody cutting me off. It doesn't, there's no connection anymore. Like the anger, if it does come up again, it's like, oh, well, what is this really about? And it gets faster and faster.
Yeah. And it's really great as a way to just automatically forgive everyone.
Yeah.
As you're driving and people are cutting you off, it's like you almost find this space of gratitude that says, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for cutting me off and exposing my own insecurity that I have with myself. But again, that's a great, just kind of a relationship principle when you realize that other people aren't the ones that are causing you internal conflict. They're the ones that are helping you to expose it.
Yeah.
And that way all your enemies immediately become friends.
Yeah.
In that way.
That are helping you expand and heal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely the triggering. Like people who trigger you are your most valuable teachers. And that sucks sometimes. You're like, why are you such an asshole? But it's like, well, there's something within me I can work on that will liberate me on some level, that will free me up from from that bondage of having that reaction to the external.
Well, and when you say bondage, that creates this huge image for me of that's all it is one big bondage. When you start looking at the external world and saying it's because of that I feel this way.
Yeah.
Rather coming into this really intimate space. And again, for me, it always comes back to I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it's so funny too, because even as I do what I do as a quote unquote teacher, whatever that is, I still feel terribly out of control in my everyday life, but it becomes this beautiful chaos.
Yeah. Fantastically out of control.
Yeah. Fantastically out of control. But in more and more, there's just this trust that gives that over. Yeah. It says, you know, you're right. I'm not in control of this person. I think that I am. There's life moving that's in control. And it's not up to me, even though I want it to be up to me.
And everything's going to be okay.
Yeah. And everything's going to be okay.
Yeah. Because I see a lot of people right now around me that are all in that space of like not knowing what the hell they're doing or what's going on or what's going to happen next month, you know, and it's this very interesting space. It's fun to be in with other people because then we're all kind of encouraging each other like, yeah, I don't know either, you know, fuck it. Like this is crazy ride. But it's definitely a new space to be in where I think historically, like our parents, like they had their jobs and their homes and everything was kind of stable and they just lived their lives even if it wasn't their highest joy. Yeah. You know, they had it and that's what they did. And now so many people are stepping out of that into the unknown, which is adventurous but terrifying. Yeah. Yeah.
And why would we do that? I think for me, it doesn't make any sense, the current structure.
Yeah.
And I know for me, my experience with leaving the last job that I had, it was like, this just doesn't make any fucking sense to me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us are starting to realize that. And I think that's what changes the social construct too.
Oh, yeah.
Is when you just start realizing that this is stupid.
Yeah. And you don't want to play this game anymore.
Yeah. Just don't want to play it.
And it's like the evolution, like, okay, now what can we do?
Yeah.
And whether that means like going back to live in the woods or like, I don't know what the next phase is. But I definitely feel like there's this movement back towards simplicity and communal living and, you know, locality of like buying local and like all this stuff. We've kind of like gone through that, you know, you can do all this stuff and buy stuff from all over the world and have all this crap, but then does that really make you happy? No. So let's try something else and, you know, continuously on that path to ourselves, back to ourselves.
So from your perspective, what is it that allows us to be happy in that way? I mean, if we're seeing that, oh, it's not here, it's not here, it's not here, as we go out and we try and master the physical reality.
Yeah.
It's like we are brought back to that simplicity of being, and the way that it expresses itself, I'm sure, is just going to be different for everyone.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes down to choosing, like you realize that it's not about the externals. So you get to choose it or not in every moment. Yeah. And just being present with what is and appreciating and accepting whatever that is in the moment. And that practice of letting go of the externals and letting go of all of that and working to heal your own internal stuff. And then getting that more and more balanced, like your internal, internal wholeness and joy, and then matching up your external to like kind of connect with that in an authentic way.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that it always comes back to this internal, simplicity of just returning to the authentic movement of now, which is really saying, where's the conflict? You know, because if I'm not with joy, if there's something that's going on that seems to steal my peace, then you return inward and just ask, what am I arguing with? What seems to be the big problem? And when I ask that, the mind just kind of takes off and be like, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, fuck this guy, fuck that guy.
Well, because you can always find more and more problems. Yeah. Like, there's infinite number of problems. Yeah. You know, there's the government, there's your neighbor, there's your, you know, partner, your ex-partner, or there's your money situation, or there's, you know. Yeah. Infinite number of things to argue with. But at a certain point, I find that that's not fun anymore. You just like, get tired of arguing.
Could you say that conflict boils down to the statement, I'm not who I think I should be?
Yes, ultimately. But with the, I can't be who I think I should be because of these people. Yeah. And so it's, I'm not who I think I should be. And then if you have that layer of blame, you know, I can't be who I think I should be because of these things.
Right. Well, there's that sense of separation. And then we interpret it as saying, I'm not who I should be.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there we say, why?
Yeah.
And then we start looking at the external world. And I think that's the first mistake is you feel the sense of separation and then you start looking towards the three-dimensional landscape and say, why? Mm-hmm. Why do I feel separate? And then you start looking at all the people in your life. You start looking at your job and all of that, not realizing that it really doesn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah. And so if you are who you should be or who you want to be, then there wouldn't be any problems. Right?
No, there'd be no conflict. And so who is this that we are already that is without conflict? And for me, I hear when I ask that question, I hear these, spiritual teachers like Muji or Shanti or whatever. And it always comes back to the surrendering of the idea of who we are. And coming to this space of no self and completely surrendering the moment to that no self space, which it's such an experiential thing too, because to put words to it for me doesn't do much, but that space that I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, and the self is the defined, separate, limited self of like, well, I'm this, which is actually isn't what you are because it's all the finger pointing at the moon.
Yeah, yeah.
But so surrendering, like you're saying, your ideas, your concepts of who you are, who you think you are, who you should be.
Yeah.
And so then it comes back to the present moment again.
Exactly.
Then you just are here with no definition and no limitations and no boundaries and no arguments.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, because
ideally,
when I ask myself, and I was asking as I was driving up here, like, is it really okay for me to just drop everything and be happy or be at joy? Mm-hmm. Not as if I wasn't, but just as like a practical question, because sometimes it's more clear than others. But as I asked that question, I saw my mind go into like this checklist of, well, this is okay and this is okay. It's like, wait, no, stop that. We're not asking about the checklist, to make sure everything else is okay. Just for this moment right now, can you find some space of joy, regardless of what's going on? But it's interesting how the mind immediately wants to look to the future to get permission to come back to this moment and be okay. Yeah. It's like, can I be a joy? And then the mind goes and looks for permission. Yeah. But the
safety. Right?
Yeah, safety. Yeah. Can I check out? It's kind of like I'm driving a car. Is it okay to, take my hands off the wheel and just enjoy myself? But from a practical level, that doesn't work.
Well, if you're in a city, no, but if you're out in the desert with no roads, then theoretically you can do that. I was listening to this podcast, the Rob Cast, I think. This guy, he's a pastor, a preacher, but he's very progressive, and so he has a lot of interesting things to say about like Christianity and the Bible, but then also consciousness. But he talks about how in his sermons he thinks of himself as just creating the space. I guess he's transmitting that energy of wholeness, and people get out of it whatever they get out of it, and oftentimes they'll say that they got something out of it that he wasn't even talking about. Yeah. And so for him, it was just this recognizing that it's just creating the space for people to have their own experience. Yeah. And again, it goes beyond like the ideas. Like, okay, today we're going to talk about these topics. Yeah. But again, like none of it's real. And it's all about the presence and like.
Yeah. So you're just creating the space for people to check into themselves. But that's the same kind of perspective that I have when I go and share. Yeah. It's like the words, I don't know what I'm going to say, but let's just, rest in this silent, still space and see what life has to say to us. And maybe there's value in creating that space for ourselves too.
Oh yeah. I definitely think so. I think that's the main thing is like creating that space and choosing that space. Like, okay, I'm going to attempt to be in a space of joy or happiness right now, regardless of tomorrow or yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like there's a lot of value there too in the way of allowing yourself to connect with joy even when everything seems shitty, because that almost like it charges you. It's like you're plugging into truth or you're plugging into yourself. And when you allow your experience to be joyful, then you're going to be more accessible from life, to
Yeah.
receive insight, to receive direction, to receive guidance.
And to connect with people around you and with yourself.
Yeah, because if we're all stressed out and full of conflict, we're not really listening to life. We're not listening to the subtle cues or the voice that's trying to guide us. And so there is such a vital importance in being able to set everything down. But of course, that's like the value of spiritual practice. Yeah. Whatever the practice is just to bring your attention to the moment so that you can see that there's no problem right now and give you that, 15, 20 minutes of connection.
Yeah. And the connection is what it's all about. Connecting with yourself and then connecting with whoever is with you. Because that's what we're here for, I think, as humans too, is to connect with each other. Yeah. Like humans aren't meant to just like go live in a cave by themselves. Like some of them do that, but it's really like the whole point of this is to have relationship and play and talk and interact and love each other and receive love and
living in a cave just does not sound appealing. But I will say that I have been in some spaces as far as internally where that's like, oh, no problem. If that's what I need to do. Yeah. If that is what, because I mean, again, we have those moments where we dip into this divine sense of connection and it's like anything could happen and it doesn't matter because you see the essence of life, that all is well. And so no matter what happens, all is still well. Yeah. And
which is nice to live from that space, even though it sounds kind of disconnected. When you can live in that space, it just makes the whole ride much easier too. Yeah. Like when, if something comes up, like happened here, I was told that I was going to be evicted, and I just knew, I was like, no, everything's going to work out fine, and so I didn't stress about it, and my intuition didn't tell me to take a bunch of action and find a new house or whatever. So, I just kind of sat with it and was present for the 30 days. And the last day I was supposed to be in my house, the landlords changed their mind, and they're like, oh, you can stay. And but if I hadn't have had that knowing that it was going to be okay, it would have been really stressful and I would have been really upset.
Yeah. And I think too, as you rest in that knowing that it's all going to work out and it's going to be okay, it makes it easier for life to facilitate a transition or facilitate whatever, because it's almost like you're in agreement with life that it knows what it's doing.
Exactly.
And if we're not in agreement or if we're with argument, you're telling life to go fuck itself. Yeah. And, you're going to have your pity party.
Yeah. And you're not even going to listen probably when life knocks on your door.
Yeah. Crying so loud. And I think that's kind of like the natural transition that I've experienced is this more willingness to let life do what it needs to do, even though it seems to terribly jeopardize my story.
Yeah.
And
your ideals.
And my ideals.
Of how you feel like you should be living up to. The standards that we create for ourselves.
Yeah, and if we ever want to know what our ideals are, just look at what we argue against.
Yeah. Or what you hate in other people.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
That mirror. Or even I was thinking about today, vices. Yesterday I was thinking, why can't I just live on wine and cheese and chocolate and coffee? That's all I want. Wine, cheese, chocolate, and coffee. And of course, all of those things, are the things that I believe, or my body sometimes tells me are not good for me or whatever. Yeah. And so then there's that struggle again of oh, I want to eat this, but I should be having salad, or I should eat more vegetables. And that whole back and forth of how much do you let yourself eat the crap? Right. And then how much do you stop yourself and try to eat the salad? And it's such a funny game.
It is.
I don't stress out about it now like I used to, but it's still there sometimes. Yeah. I'm like, do I drink coffee today? I had coffee yesterday. I shouldn't have coffee today. I don't even need coffee at all. Why am I buying coffee?
That's such a great reflection of just mental noise.
Yeah.
And of course we all experience that. Just the mind's constant commentary of what is acceptable and what's not. And of course, because we're trying to play this 3-dimensional experience game and, move through it in a healthy way and take care of ourselves. But at the same time, too, as you discover lots of these awakening experiences, it almost makes the human game irrelevant and all of those arguments of what I should eat or what I shouldn't eat irrelevant.
Yeah.
And in the way of, oh, it's just about joy.
Yeah.
But there's still a fear that doesn't want to follow that.
Yeah.
Because oh, I'm just going to get fat again. But then, so it's an interesting game, and I don't think I'll ever figure it out, even though at times I think I do.
Yeah, sometimes I'll be like, oh God, I'll figure it out. And then it changes.
Yeah.
And then I'd be like, I don't understand anything. I don't know what I'm doing.
I know. Yeah. And that's almost my favorite part, even though that can be the painful part.
Yeah.
But it is true that we have these experiences where we think we know.
Or we do know sometimes. I feel like even like we do know.
Yeah, but we don't know it conceptually. We know it on a deeper level. And so here's how I kind of see it is like we get this really magnificent insight, and then the mind interprets the insight. And it's the interpretation of the insight that we confuse as a knowing. Mm-hmm. Right? And so it's not my story of the awakening. It's the awakening itself that's real. Yeah. And the awakening itself isn't about anything other than the present moment. Even though we want to apply it to all these different areas of our lives.
Yeah, we want to make rules, or we want to make like, okay, this is what I do now. I create this framework based on this experience. Yeah,
and it's so funny how crafty the mind is too.
Yeah, it is. It's tricky.
Yeah, it really always is.
Comes back in. It's sneaky. It gets like sneakier and sneakier.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's part of one thing that really pisses me off is to see how sneaky it can be. It's like, you son of a bitch. You totally went in there and made a story out of that and tried to identify with it. Jeez.
But then too, it becomes laughable as you recognize it more.
Yeah.
Because it is, again, like it's all part of the game. And it's not that it's a separate thing. It is us. And like our thoughts are the universe thinking.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing even.
Yeah.
It's just what is.
God damn it. It's just what is. And that's why I like how the show is called Spiritual Bullshit.
Yeah. Because it's all bullshit.
Because it's all bullshit.
Yeah.
It's like spirituality is right now.
Yeah.
This is it. Whatever you're doing right now, this is the space that's true. This is the space that's real. And
it's so simple, and we make it so difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we want to talk about it. We want to figure it out.
Or we want to argue with it.
Yeah. Yeah. We just want to listen to the mental noise. I can see how that's so disheartening for the ego self or the ego mind to hear that it's just about right now. That this is it. This is the only thing that's real. Because the mind has so much invested in future. In expectation or the fulfillment of whatever.
Or the protection against.
Yeah, and all of that beyond the present moment.
Yeah. Yeah, because you don't need anything in the present moment. Like you don't need to protect against, like there's no lines.
There's nothing in it for you.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that sticks out from the teachings that I've heard was there's nothing in it for you. Like the idea of a self, that you're not going to get anything out of this life experience that will add anything to your stature.
Yeah.
And this is what we're trying to protect.
Yeah.
This is what we're trying to hold on to, some sort of idea that builds
But that's
us
an
up.
interesting thought. So you're not going to get anything out of this life that's going to add to you.
Yeah. You're already it.
That's a big thought.
It is.
That's a big idea. You're not going to get anything out of this life. Because we also, even talking about the soul, we're like, oh, the soul evolves and the soul's here to learn lessons. But is it actually adding anything to it?
Yeah, and see, I don't see that.
Yeah.
Because to add to what? The only thing that's going to be added to is a story.
Yeah.
That's, a story of more or less. Yeah, that's going to end.
Yeah.
And the story literally doesn't have anything to do with the essence of what you are in the present moment. And so all of this mental movement that wants to defend, protect, cling, avoid honesty, all of that is an effort to get something.
Yeah.
To hold on to something in the way
or get more of something.
Yeah, that's going to add something to you as a separate human being.
Yeah.
And there is just not that.
When I had one of my kind of enlightenment experiences, it was the realization, that there's nothing to be added, but I can expand my experience of joy.
Yeah.
So that was what I explained my understanding as, which again, I don't know if it's true because it's the words I'm using to explain this experience that I had. But And I guess even the joy, if that's already existing, it isn't even actually adding anything or expanding even the joy, but just your experience, like your ability to be present in the moment and to experience the joy that already exists.
Exactly.
In the
It's
moment.
already
so you're still not adding or even expanding really. You're not expanding anything. You're just experiencing it more.
Yeah. And that's what I see the whole enlightenment thing or awakening being, is the recognition of what is already here.
Yeah.
And that you don't need to go anywhere to find it.
Because it's everything.
It's everything, and it's already what you are. And so in that, you're not taking something on new. It's just seeing, oh, this is what already is.
Yeah.
And that's what you fall into. And I see that as the expansion of joy, nothing that we acquire or even learn how to manipulate. It's just dropping all of the argument and seeing that everything that you're trying to get to is already here.
All right. Well, we're done then.
Yeah. This is it.
We don't need to talk anymore ever. Last episode, folks.
Oh, that's true. Well, it's so funny, too. Because it's like, if I was driving over here, it's like, well, what am I getting out of this? Nothing. Why am I going here? I don't know. and I feel like that, too. It's like I have to remind myself. It's like tomorrow I'm driving up to Eugene to give these talks that I've been giving every 2 weeks. And I mean, it doesn't make any sense for me to do it, you know, like from a financial standpoint, because I don't make any money and I'm driving to, you know, spending 5 hours in the car to go out and give a talk to a few people. Yeah. And there's just nothing in it for me.
Because it's not adding anything to you.
No, it's not.
But then what it comes down to is you do it because you fucking want to.
I enjoy it.
Yeah, you enjoy it and you're choosing.
Yeah.
And you're creating this experience on this level as a human, playing this game and creating your story or whatever.
Yeah. And if I wanted something from it, then I would just drive up with anxiety. Yeah. Hoping that it turned out, you know, a certain way. Yeah. And if I didn't, there'd be disappointment. And so you see how much trouble we get in believing that there's something in it for us. Yeah. I even find that in my own experience right now with the issue of honesty. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm like in this dynamic in a relationship where I'm finding a really difficult time being honest about how I feel about the dynamic of the relationship. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting thing that I really can't articulate yet, but it's almost like a difficulty to be honest because I'm so unclear about it for myself. Mm-hmm. But yet I still see a need that says this needs to be addressed in some way. Yeah. And so, you know, we'll see how that works out. But I can see how my unwillingness to be honest is trying to hold on to an egoic sense. Yeah. Like of protecting something. Yeah.
Or manipulating
something. So yeah, it's interesting to watch how every effort to not acknowledge the truth is to hold on to the idea that I'm going to get something from it. Yeah. And so if we completely eliminate the idea of gaining something, then it seems like honesty is just natural and effortless. Yeah.
If you're just totally authentic and you don't give a shit about anything that might happen or what the person might think or how they might.
Well, and that's part of it too. That's what I see the major hang up is, how do I articulate this without sounding like a dick? Yeah. Or without hurting somebody's feelings. Yeah. And
that's a game that, I mean, that's what we play. We play that game most of our lives. Yeah. It's like trying to either anticipate what somebody else is going to be feeling if we are honest. Yeah. And then, you know, playing that whole game, which is like, we have no idea what their reaction is going to be ultimately. Yeah. And then even if it is like a negative reaction, it's still, if it's based on truth and honesty, it's still the best for everybody.
It's still good. Yeah. And I see how when I examine or inquire into my own process with that, I see that it's not really about the other person and how they feel even. Yeah. It's about how I'm worried about being perceived.
Yeah. That's a huge one that I've processed too.
And so again,
I want to control other people's perceptions of me.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially people that you're intimate with or whatever. And so, yeah. Well, I'm so stoked to see how that plays out over the next week. Which is funny too, because it's like, never mind. I didn't want to go into this. Too personal.
All right. Well, I do really like that point about that there's nothing to add to who you are, because we're already everything.
Yeah.
And so then it comes down to whatever you're doing is just because you want to.
Yeah, because it makes you question. I mean, if you really start to see that, and we can look at our past experience and be like, all these movements of trying to gain something, whether it's like the promotion or whatever, and you realize, wow, this didn't change anything.
Yeah.
There's still this sense of separation.
Yeah.
And so when you start to realize that, then it's like, well, what the fuck am I doing? Mm-hmm. Where do I think I'm going?
Yeah.
And you have to get more honest about your experience in the way of, why am I really here?
Yeah.
What do I really desire, like in the most sincere way? And am I willing to move in that direction?
Yeah. It's a kind of crazy 0 point to get to. Because again, like I had that experience of getting down to the 0 point of like, okay, why am I here? Yeah. Like, why wouldn't I leave the planet right now? And for me at the time, it was my daughter. I was like, well, I could leave and she'd be fine. But I'd rather like stick around and be here for her, at least for a little while longer. Yeah. Because ultimately it doesn't matter, in that way of like, we're already everything. And so, yeah. It's so crazy because it's so like not the reality that we live in. Yeah. As far as like commonly accepted what reality is. Yeah.
Yeah. But I like the honesty of that inquiry.
Yeah.
That everything is fine. Everything would be fine and you can't go wrong. And so why would I stay?
Yeah.
And when you ask yourself that question, I see a really just sincere movement of authenticity.
Yeah.
Of getting in touch with the primary sense of being human and letting go of all the facade. Yeah. Because the weight of the facade makes you want to kill yourself.
Yeah.
That's been my experience of every time there was this suicidal tendency, it was always about trying to hold up an image and being like, I have to be this person.
Yeah.
That, is terribly broken or
but
whatever.
It's like, the image or even the ideals end up crushing you or suffocating you because they're not real living presence.
Yeah, and all of mine were ideals that were projected from other people.
Yeah.
It's like a perfect example is I never cleaned my room really as a child.
Yeah.
Because I'm, that's just not my style, I guess. I'm not a super organized person.
Yeah.
But everybody else in my family was. And so there was this projection of an ideal that if you're a functioning member of society, you keep your room clean.
Yeah.
Or everything's organized. And that the weight of that was just so soul crushing for me because there was nothing in me that could match that and live up to that expectation.
There's no movement within you to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, and I like examining that because it shows how there is this natural movement within us that, tends to lean this direction or lean that direction, not good or bad, just what's natural. And when
authentic.
Yeah. And when you come to terms with that and move in that flow, then you see how everything still works together and ends up, supporting the highest good. And you don't have to try and pretend to be something that you're not. That was fun.
It was fun.
Time's up.
High five.
Woohoo! All right. Wow, we did another episode. It's funny, I come in here thinking, man, I really don't know what we're going to talk about. We got to do this for 45 minutes? Holy shit. But somehow it worked out.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to continue on my life and just trust that everything's going to keep working out.
It will.
And fully admit that I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
And we're already everything. Everything's the ideal right now in the present moment, and there's nothing to add or to gain. So that's kind of liberating.
Yeah. God, I'm blown away with the contrast and experience from totally moving in that truth and having no argument and absolute trust. And then finding the wave shifting. It's like, wait, what the fuck now?
Yeah.
And it's just so funny to me that could happen. And because when I had the thought of leaving here and trusting and the ease that I've experienced in that, where it's like not even a question if I would trust or not.
Yeah.
But yet there's the thought that I might not. It's like, wait, what? Oh my God. I don't know what I'm doing.
Divine amnesia.
Divine amnesia.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. And of course, we'll probably be back here next week, but no promises. And check us out online. You can look up us on Facebook, tigmonk.com. Other than that, we appreciate you listening.
Yeah.
Aloha and cheers to the beauty that you already are.
Bye.
You've been listening to Spiritual Bullshit with Tigmonk and Maya Lila. Learn more at tigmonk.com.